thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time today. I had some questions about your life and career and how you got to the point in your career that you are right now. And if you had any advice for people who want to get involved in this insanity. And yeah, so I just wanted to start with, where were you born exactly?
I was born in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan.
Sault Ste. Marie?
Yes.
Okay.
I never lived there. I was born in Sault Ste. Marie. I think my parents lived in Cedarville at the time, and so Sault Ste. Marie was the closest hospital. So that's factually where I was born, and I think I lived in Cedarville for a little while, and then we moved from there. So.
Okay.
But I was too young to remember any of that.
Sure.
Clearly.
And then, so like your earliest memories, I suppose, like childhood in the UP, where was it
actually
Cedarville?
they would have been downstate because
you
we
lived...
ended up my family moved around a bit. My dad was a superintendent of schools, and my dad was kind of a restless guy. He always wanted to move up the ladder, so he'd always go for the next biggest job. And we lived in the UP for a little while, and I was really, really young, and then we were outside of Green Bay for a little while, and then we went downstate. And so my earliest memories are actually living in a town called Ravenna, which is near Muskegon, downstate.
I gotcha.
And then from there we moved to Flint, and then I got back into the UP just when I was getting ready to go into high school. We moved back up here.
Okay.
So I'm a Uper born, and my parents are from the UP, so I'm a Uper through and through, but
sure.
I live downstate.
Yeah, absolutely. When I interviewed Jimmy, him and I talked about like what exactly is a Uper and how you can be grandfathered in. I've heard that term.
Oh, sure.
And it's a very serious thing. It's a very serious thing, I understand.
It is. It's special to be a born and bred Uper, yes.
So did you have any either theater experience, or were you interested in theater before college at all? Or like, do you have like a memory of you saw something, either film or theater, and you were like, that is interesting?
No, not really. I do remember that there were two situations. I do remember in grade school, I can't remember what grade it was, but probably in the upper grades, fourth or fifth grade, we went to a play when we were downstate with the school group. We went to a play. I do remember that.
Okay.
And I remember enjoying it. And then we did our sixth grade play, and I was in that. I said, okay, I'll audition for this. I don't know, audition, whatever that meant at the time you were put in the play. And it was a musical called George Washington.
Okay.
And it's some school musical.
George Washington, the musical.
Yes, and I played John Hancock. I remember that. And I was in sixth grade at the time. But I'll say this is very interesting that you bring this up, because, and I've said this before, and I often forget this. I'm severely dyslexic, so I had a hard time in school. But I was always very athletic, and I tried my hardest, but things didn't come easy for me, certainly in the classroom. And so I wasn't necessarily pointed out ever for anything. Most of the time I was doing remedial things and all of that, and the other kids were just whipping through school like nothing, so I kind of felt a little bit falling through the cracks.
Yeah.
But in that play, I remember that I was doing the play and I really enjoyed it, and I had a great time doing it. We had tons of fun, and I remember that we were at some break and the teacher was talking to us, who was the director. And they were talking to us, and they said, you guys, we got enthusiasm here, but there are two people who have incredible enthusiasm. And they named one boy, and then she named me.
Wow.
And that was the first time anybody had ever, pointed me out for anything, really. And I remember that very clear, that memory. And I guess I never really thought about that, and I only think about it now in reference to what I ended up doing for a living, which is very strange. So
yeah.
So it probably was a very pivotal moment. But no, other than that, I didn't have any involvement with theater. My family was always very musical. My brother's very musical. All my family, my dad played piano. There was always music and singing around the house, and big family, broad family. We would put on our little Christmas plays, do the the nativity or something like that for grandma, and that, just have fun in the basement and stuff like that. But we never did any formal things. But I think art was always around us, and my mother did act a little bit in college. And
oh wow.
So but she was also she was an English teacher, and she was very much into great literature and that. So
sure. Yeah, that's so interesting. You were in sixth grade.
That was sixth grade, yeah.
And then, the director mentioned that you had enthusiasm and,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange how you did remember that. At the time, it might not have seemed like much, but, I just feel like when something happens that young that means a lot to you, it's like, yeah, you always remember. And like, it's just interesting that you were doing, well, theater at that time. It was like, it was sixth grade, but it was still like you were putting on a show. And
Yeah.
wow.
And that was the thing that I got pointed out for, like the first time. So strange.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Kind of kids me.
Yeah, I was never diagnosed with dyslexia, but I find myself like I have trouble reading sometimes, and like I don't mispronounce words, but like I'll say the wrong word as I'm reading out loud, and I don't know, that's might be a mild form of dyslexia.
Yeah,
but
it certainly is. That's there's certainly part of it.
I just say the completely wrong word.
Yeah, and in my time, because I was born in the '60s, early '60s, dyslexia was when there were a lot. It turns out a lot of students that had it, and nowadays it's very they have a lot of education for it, and a lot of training, a lot of help for it. But in my day, you were just considered you're just stupid, you're just dumb, you don't try,
wow.
You don't work hard, you were kind of you would be thrown into all the remedial classes, and the teachers would just basically just say, oh yeah, that kid's just not very smart, he doesn't try very hard, he's lazy, he can't. And if you talk to anybody with dyslexia from my era, they will say exactly the same thing.
Wow.
Yeah, and now it's diagnosed and we have help for it and all of that, but it wasn't at that time. It was like you were just, you didn't care.
Yeah.
Because you struggled so hard.
Well, and like, yeah, well, that's obviously a shame. But I mean, like, it's just ironic with what you're involved in now. It's like there's so much reading involved. And like, do you think that caused you to want to work harder at getting better at reading and memorizing and reading?
I think so. I think certainly the theater did help with that.
Yeah.
Because I did have to read scripts. I had to stand up and read in front of people. The nightmare of all dyslexics is getting up in front of somebody and reading.
It's the fear.
Because you just can't. It's hard. It's hard to read. And that was always a palpable fear of mine forever. So I think part of the theater was kind of breaking through that a little bit and being forced to have to get up. And but I was also probably very good at memorization, though, because memorizing is what you do. If you can't read well, you just try to memorize what you have in front of you, and then you act like you can read it.
And then you just act like yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So then where did you get? So two questions, I guess. Where did you get your undergrad, and what was your major at first in college?
Okay. Well, when I graduated from high school, I went to community college for the first year. Didn't know what I was going to do, but I've got to go to college. So there was a community college near where we were, and so I went there. Got a few of my, those gen ed classes kind of, I hate to say out of the way, but you know how it is.
Yeah.
And so I had English, I had a few other classes, and that was good for me because I was kind of getting integrated into a college setting from high school, and there were kids from other places that were at that school and whatnot, not just local people. So that was helpful. And then I always had liked architecture.
Okay.
I still to this day like to just design buildings and rooms and houses and things as a hobby. But I was thinking about it very seriously. Then I was like, well, maybe I'll be an architect, be that. But of course, that was going to be rough because another part of dyslexia is math. Sure. And architects obviously have to know math very well and have to take a lot of high-level math classes. That was not my forte. So I ended up then, I wanted to go to university, and so I came to Northern in my second year.
Okay.
And that's where I went to undergrad, was here.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when did you, do you remember there being a moment or maybe an individual that got you interested in theater?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody has one, right?
Sure.
I have a couple of very good stories about that. One immediate one was that when I got here, I was taking classes, and I had to take what were called liberal studies classes at that time,
right?
Before gen eds, but the same thing. And I had to take one in the fine arts, which now is under human expression, I think, but I knew it was called the fine arts in the liberal studies section. And I took an intro to theater class because I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll take that. That'll be enough. And I remember walking into that class, and it was actually in the theater. And
in the FRT?
Yes.
Okay.
And there were about 90 kids in there in that class.
Wow.
And I sat way in the back. And, I'm like, I don't know what this is. And then this guy comes walking in the room, and he's dressed like Colonel Sanders, I swear to God.
That's amazing.
Head to toe. White beard, the whole thing. And he was incredibly funny, and he just started talking. and just talking.
Talking like
Anecdotes
Colonel
and
Sanders.
anecdotes and anecdotes. And just about life and theater, and it was very funny. And so I was intrigued. So 2 days later, when we come to the class again, I went down and sat in the front row because I wanted to really see this guy. Who is this guy? Walks in again, and again just goes into the same thing. Just starts talking about certain things about theater, but then always filling them with an anecdote.
Sure.
It's all stories. It was all stories to lead in, like little parables to help you understand the concept he was talking about. And I found that fascinating. He was incredibly charming. He was incredibly funny. And then I subsequently discovered, as I'm sitting in that front row, I'm sitting with a bunch of theater kids, because all the theater kids would sit in the front row. Everybody else sat in all the rows way back. Cause
theater kids want to be seen.
And he was, and he knew what they were, because these were kids that he had kind of wanted to come to school because they were going to be working with him and being in plays. And so I'm the kid. I don't know anything about this, but I could tell these kids are. Mm-hmm. And so he was the first one that he would claim that he discovered me. His name was Dr. James Report.
Okay.
And he was the founder of our theater program here. And he was the founder of our theater program through Forrest Roberts, who was the first one to teach drama here.
I gotcha.
And then Daddy Bear came in the 1950s. His nickname is Daddy Bear. And he came in the 1950s, and when he came in, Forrest Roberts said, hey, we're going to start instituting, a performance kind of, degree here, where we're going to put on plays, and we're going to start doing that. It's the way a lot of universities kind of develop their theater programs.
Yeah.
And Daddy Bear, Dr. Porter, was that guy. So subsequently, I loved his class, and I really got into it, got to know the kids there, and I said, well, I don't know what this is. We had to go to see a show, though. And I remember this.
You had to go see a show.
Now, I grew up, I was an athlete my whole life. I played 5 sports a year. I was an athlete, so I was very kinesthetic, which is very typical of dyslexics. Some of the greatest athletes in the world have been dyslexics because they connect very well to kinesthetic, physical things.
Oh, I think that Bruce Jenner,
absolutely, 100%.
She admitted to being dyslexic growing up.
And but on the field, he could kick everybody's butt on the field.
Yes.
He couldn't do it in the classroom, and he could connect, and that's absolutely true. So I thrived, and I was a good athlete. I was very successful, and so because of that, I liked physical things. I liked, there's a performance element to being on the field in a game. People are watching, right?
Oh yeah.
And so we had to go see a show, and it was a show called The Fantastics, which is a little small musical. And I remember it started, and it was in the theater, and I had to do that, send my program in order to get credit for the points.
Yeah.
And I was watching it, and it started with people walking down the aisles right next on that aisle. They came through the back doors and walked down speaking before they went up on stage, and they're in character. And I remember just going,
what just happened?
I can do that.
Yeah.
What is this? I could do it better than that. And so my competitive self kicked in.
Yeah.
And I had just taken a theater class, and I was like, I think I can do this. But one of the strangest things that happened, John, is that I'm manically early for everything, much to the chagrin of my wife. And I would get to that class early, and the theater, I often would be the first person to walk in. It'd be unlocked, and I would sit down, and only the ghost light was on. And I would sit there, and it was kind of nice because it was calm in there, and maybe I'd start to fall asleep. It was just very quiet, and I'd be the only one in there. But I remember distinctly once when I went in there, I was sitting there, and suddenly I just knew what everything was. I knew it was a ghost light. I knew what backstage looked like. I knew there was a fly system. I just knew it all.
It just clicked.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I had no reason to know that. I'd never been on a stage in my life. I just knew it was familiar to me. So it's one of those moments of. So with that, and I saw the show, I got enough courage to then audition for a play the next semester when I didn't have theater class, and I auditioned for a play. I think I did decide, I'd say maybe I'll take an acting class too, and I took that, and that was huge for me. And I auditioned for the play, and I got in, and that's the rest of the story.
Then the rest
became
is
the
history.
rest of my life. Now, the other person is Dr. James Panowski.
Yeah.
Dr. Panowski got me to audition because he hadn't met me yet. But I was walking through the lobby one day, and I had a tear in my pants.
Okay.
And I walked in. He was in the box. His office was in the box office in those days. And I walked in. I said, "Hey, sir, do you have any like needle and thread or something? I've got a rip in my pants."
Right.
And he goes, "Oh, let me take a look." And he's looking through his drawers, and oh, here, and he had one of those little travel packs of, that he would travel with. He traveled a lot, and he goes, hey, why don't you go ahead and take this, and go ahead, you can use that and sew, go in the bathroom or you can sew your pants on. I was like, well, so great. So I went and sewed them up, and I came back into the office to hand him the thing, and he goes, hey, you ever audition for a play? That was Dr. P through and through.
Wow.
He just, anybody would see, hey, try audition for a play. And I was, thinking about it, and so he kind of convinced me to do it.
And then what was the play that you...
It was the funny thing that happened on the way to the Forum. It was a musical by Stephen Sondheim. Very, very funny. And I played a Protean. I played one of the smallest ensemble roles, but it's almost a Greek chorus role where they do everything. These three Proteans kind of control everything. They bring up all the scenery, everything. They're like within the whole play. And that was it.
You just knew.
Yeah.
That's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, that was it. I was I was good at it. I felt I was good at it. And I was, like most people who get into theater at a young age, totally fascinated by it.
Yeah.
And just, it was like electricity.
Yeah. Well, it's just so interesting you say, well, how you would get there early and then you'd be sitting there by yourself and you just sort of knew like everything clicked for you and it felt familiar, oddly enough, even though you haven't really done it. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, like certain things I think just kind of click in your brain and you're like, well, where has this been my whole life?
I know. and this is very strange. And I suppose if I hadn't ever taken that class, I don't know what I would have ever done.
Sure, yeah.
No idea.
Yeah.
So it's, things line up once in a while, I guess.
And then so then you knew that you wanted to be involved in theater for the rest of your life. And then where did you get your master's after your...
I got my master's at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. But this is another P story here. I went out and I worked when I graduated.
Okay.
I graduated with a theater degree from Northern. Had a summer stock job in... I was going to get into the business, right? A summer stock job in Texas. That was for a whole summer. It was great.
Where in Texas?
Galveston, Texas.
Okay.
Which is a little strip island just about 40 miles. It's on the coast away from Houston.
Okay.
It was great. So it was some outdoor summer theater. It was most summer theaters are populated with young students right out of college or coming. So it was a blast.
Sure.
We had a great time, did 2 shows, worked hard, but it was a great summer. Had a great time, met a lot of people. And subsequently met a lot of people whom 20 years later I saw again, still in the business. And that's where you cut your teeth. And so I did that. I did a gig in Minneapolis. I moved to Seattle for a couple years, and I did a couple shows out there. I was trying to get into the business, right? I wasn't yet moving to New York City or anything, but I was kind of bouncing around. And then I had siblings in Seattle, and I wanted to go out there. So a couple years there, had a very good time. Ended up coming back to Marquette. And when I came back to Marquette, I was kind of floundering. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I still want to do this, and I was maybe going to move somewhere, maybe move to Minneapolis, try to crack in and again, I knew people down there. And, but I was always, Dr. Panowski was here running the theater, and I was always checking in and say, hey, how you doing? Oh, good to see you, Paul, and, I was one of, I think that I was I had won the Senior of the Year here when I graduated and all that. So, I got along, by that time I knew Pete really, really well. And, And I was considered one of his better students and blah, blah, blah. And they were doing a production of Into the Woods. And he called me out of the blue and he asked me if I'd be in it. And I did. I said, okay, I've got nothing going on. I was holding a job just locally and I said, I'll be in it. And I know now that he did that intentionally because he wanted to get me back in.
Wow.
Get me back into, he saw I was floundering. And that was a huge trigger for me because it was a great production. I played one of the princes. I had a great time with it. And he was like, he pulled me aside and said, this is what you do, right? You got to go and do this. But you probably need to go to graduate school.
Right.
So he was recommending some graduate schools. And that's how it happened. That's how I ended up going to graduate school. I just said, okay. And at this time, I was 26 years old.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And then you went to Vegas, got your master's?
Went out to Vegas and got my master's. 3 years of very intense training, as graduate programs are. Again, met great people who I'm still in contact with, people who are in the profession, because in graduate school, most people do end up going in the profession.
Right.
Subsequently met my wife there at graduate school.
Oh, you met Your wife in Vegas?
Yes.
Okay.
Because she's from Vegas, born and raised, and her
right.
dad was
Yeah.
also a professor of theater there, and so that's how I got to know Jerry so well. Obviously,
Yeah.
he became my father-in-law. So it was a huge time for me there, and that was transformative. One of the transformative things of graduate school for me was not only the acting training, which was very intense, but it was my vocal training. I was a decent singer. I could sing okay. But I got with a teacher there, a private coach that they gave you, because I got into the musical theater program. I thought, well, musical theater, that's the thing. So they actually put me in. And it's a man named Paul Kreider. And he was relatively young at the time. How old? He was probably maybe only in his 30s, and he had been a very successful operatic baritone singer, and he had traveled around the world and sung, and now he was teaching voice, and we really connected.
Okay.
And he took my voice in one day from like here to here. In
Wow.
one day, because he saw that I could do it. Because there's this just an anatomical thing to watching somebody when they sing and sing, and then telling them, now try this, and when you can do it. But because of my kinesthetic, abilities, it's really the superpower of being dyslexic. When somebody says to do something, I can just do it. So
yeah, you can
so he
take
says, now
direction
think of
well.
your sound going up here in your forehead and doing this, and I went, and he went, and that was it.
Wow.
And my voice just took off from there.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest part of graduate school was my voice. I got a lot of really good, intense actor training and emotional training and movement training and all of that. But the vocal work was what set me up for success.
It's so nice because I have a great vocal teacher here, Donna, who she just allowed me to she gave me direction and I was able to follow it and just unlock things with my voice that I never knew were possible.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to improve, but I didn't know what that looked like. And then once you do it, you're like, oh, that's what that's supposed to sound
really
like.
something, isn't it?
That's what that feels like, and that's what that sounds like, and it's
Yeah.
just amazing when that happens.
Yeah, it's really something.
Yeah. And then you just learn actually how to not even sing better, but the way that you speak as well. And it's just, learning all of that is awesome.
Yeah.
So then after grad school, how soon after that did you go to New York?
Okay, so it's kind of a fairly quick story of my getting there. I did right away when I graduated from grad school. We had a playwriting wing at that grad school, and that was what my father-in-law taught. Actually, was playwriting, and he had one of his graduates, a guy named Robert Paxson, and he was from Salt Lake City. He was a Mormon who lived there, and he had written the book for a musical, which was going to be a musical about a regional area in St. George, Utah, about the Mormon occupation of that in the 1800s.
Okay.
And there was, obviously there was famine. They didn't have anything. It was in the middle of the desert. There was flooding that happened and flash flooding and stuff. And so it was, it's kind of a tragic story.
Yeah.
So they made a musical of it called Utah.
Okay.
And because I knew him in college, he called me up after graduation and said, hey, we're putting on this musical. It's a world premiere at this new place called Tuacahn, and we'd like you to be in it. And I was like, oh, great. I didn't even have to audition. He just just offered me the part.
Right.
So that got me a professional gig right away, right out of college.
Wow.
So I went and did that for the summer. But in that show, because they were opening this, if you ever go to St. George, Utah, it's fabulous. It's a place called Tuacahn. It's an outdoor amphitheater in the middle in Snow Canyon. It's gorgeous. It's like you're in the middle of Zion, practically. And,
Can't say I've been to Utah yet,
and
but
it's breathtaking. Right?
Okay.
The canyons are incredible. And this is an outdoor amphitheater. It's really incredible. And it had actually a performing arts school, and it was brand new. They were just opening it. It's a 2,000 seat state of the art outdoor amphitheater.
Wow.
And Utah was going to be their musical. And,
Okay.
And so because of the people from that area who are staunchly into their history, it sold out every night, right? And there's a recording of it. It was like the original production of this thing. And I think they ended up doing it for 4 years before then they stopped, and now they do other things. And a lot of just concerts come into that venue too.
Right.
But subsequent to what I'm trying to say is I because of that, the people that they hired didn't come from just that area. They hired people from all over.
Sure.
And so there were people who came in from New York. There were people, it was like a regional hire for people to have jobs for the summer. And one of my roommate, I had a roommate, we stayed in a hotel, and I literally lived in a hotel with another guy with, we had each had a bed, and that was it. You lived in a hotel for the summer, and
Gotta do it.
and you're like, okay, well, I'm getting paid to do this gig, and it's not always glamorous, but I enjoyed the show, and I had a good time doing it. I had a good character and whatnot. But they had then, and this is how it leads into everything for me. There was suddenly a flash going, oh, hey, there are auditions for Les Miserables the tour up in Salt Lake City 2 weeks from now.
Wow.
Like that.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, ooh, everybody's into there. Oh, you should go audition for that. Everybody should go audition for this. And I'm like, oh, I'd like to audition for it, but I got to drive up. And St. George and Salt Lake City are, good 4.5, 5 hours away. And I was like, well, I can't get time off. I'd have to drive up there, go to this audition, come back down. It's an audition.
Yeah.
Probably won't get the job. It's not going to matter, And so one of the girls in there had auditioned for Les Mis many times for Madame Thénardier. She was playing our older female character also, the comedic character. And they had asked her, she was the one who put the notice out because Ron LaRosa, who was running the casting at the time out of Johnson Lith in New York City for Les Mis, had seen her many times. She was from New York. And he said, hey, we'd like to see you again. And she was like, well, I can't get up there. I can't get the time off to come on up because we got a show to do. And he said, well, that's fine. Just send in a tape. And he said, and hey, by the way, if anybody else wants to go on that tape, throw some other people on.
Wow.
So she set up a thing to the guys, I can't make it up this Les Mis audition, but if anybody wants to, be put on this video, at that time it was a videotape, get up, sing a song on a videotape, we'll do it. And I said, okay. So I remember we went in one of the rooms there, and I had an accompaniment on piano, and I sang on the tape.
Yeah.
And she sent the tape to them, and he said, he got back to her and he said, hey, I'd like to, have you come back up, we'd like to see you right now. And we'd also like to see this other kid that's on the tape, and it was me.
Yeah.
So that was huge because that was like a precursor tape she had sent in. So then they were in Salt Lake City because they were performing there, and they had sat down. When they were sit down somewhere, they would often hold an audition. You're in a city, why not hold an audition for replacements and whatnot? And so they called me and said, hey, we'd really like to see you live. And so I went up there. I got a plane ticket and flew up there and auditioned for them. And then
wow, that's amazing.
Flew back. Now, I didn't get the job. I remember that in the room I sang, and I was, very nervous and whatnot. But my voice was like a laser at that time. I was right out of graduate school. I could sing anything. My voice has never been stronger in my life at that point, and it was very good. And I sang, and I remember the guy behind the table. He stops and he goes, where have you been? And I'm like, well, down in Salt Lake or down in St. George doing this show and auditioning. He said, I give you 5 stars. And he had it on this thing. 5 stars. Where have you been? I said, well, I don't know you. How do I not know you? He was very that kind of way, right? Wanted to discover talent. And my heart's beating going, oh my gosh, this guy's going to give me a job. He really loves me. And he goes, and I go, oh, because unfortunately I don't have an opening right now. And of course my heart sank to the floor because I'm like,
got my hopes
well,
up.
I still got a show down there, but at least I think I did a good job, so they'll remember me, right? So that was that, and I flew back down there. And but when I was down there, we didn't have this was pre-cell phone, so I gave my number and it went to the phone at the outdoor phone at the hotel. And somebody said, Paul, there's a call for you. And so I went and got the call, and it was actually one of the guys who was in on the audition, Ron LaRosa. And he said, hey, I just wanted to tell you how well you did and how interested we are in you. We're very interested in you to be in the show. But there needs to be an opening for you to be able to get into the show because they can't just kick somebody out of a job.
Right.
And he said, but you are on our list. But it would be really, really great if you moved to New York City. Because in New York, that's where we're based. We can see you at the spur of the moment. If we get an opening, I can call you up and say, hey, we got an opening.
Can you by chance just find a place in New York City?
Come on in. Well, that's it. He says it. To be honest, it'd be really worth it for you to move to New York.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what I ended up doing.
And then so when you moved to New York, then, I mean, what were you doing when you first moved there? And
when I first moved there, I was, like everybody else. When I first got there, I stayed with my brother in Hartford, Connecticut. My brother Dan was working in Hartford, running the historical society there at the time, and so I crashed with him.
You just took the train to...
Yes, and I was just driving. I was taking the train. I would drive my car to New Haven, hop on the train, and go into New York during the days. And I'd go to auditions, you know. And I had some very successful auditions. I did very well. I was equity by that time, so I went into Actors Equity auditions, and I got in, and I would sing, and I was getting noticed. People were paying attention to me, you know, and I was getting a lot of callbacks, and getting pretty far down the list of callbacks for shows.
Wow.
Because there, you don't just do one; you do several.
Never got an agent, right?
Never had an agent.
Never had an agent.
Didn't. No, I was lucky.
Yeah.
And I remember I'd done very, very well for a huge production of Lincoln Center, not Lincoln Center, a Carousel that was going to be at Lincoln Center, and then I was going to go tour.
Okay.
And I got right down to the last two guys of that one, and I didn't get it. And of course, I was crushed.
Yeah.
But keep going, you're doing well. And about 2 days later, so anyway, I was staying in New York. Then I moved into the city and crashed with my friend who I had lived with in Utah because he was back there.
The same guy that you lived in the hotel
yes,
with?
And I crashed with him and his pad for a little while. That lasted only for a little while because it's a small pad and he wanted his own pad. So then I had another friend, somebody I knew, acquaintance I had known from grad school. So I ended up moving out over into Queens and crashing in his place for a while. And then I got a job at a local, in town, I got a job at a bartender at a bar. And so I was there for about, maybe this was now probably about a month and a half. And I was going in and auditioning for things and getting to know some people. And then I got that all the way down to that call on that one and I didn't get it. But that was with Johnson and Liff. And at the time, Johnson and Liff was the biggest casting agency in New York City.
Okay.
Others, and they're no longer in existence, but at the time they cast all the shows.
Yeah.
All the big shows. So I knew I was in pretty well with them because they had been at those auditions and seen me because they don't audition just Les Mis, they audition lots of shows. And it's Ron and some of these other guys would be in, and he was in on those auditions too, so he saw me again do different stuff. I didn't get that job. But then I remember, I can't remember, in my mind I'm thinking it's like one day, but it's probably a couple of days later, I was bummed out I didn't get it. And then he calls me up and on the phone he says, "Hey, we have an opening in Les Mis and we want to see you. You got to come in again." And I'm like, "Oh, great,
yeah."
Because I guess I am on their list. Because everybody used to talk about, at that time, Les Mis was the big hit show, so everybody was on the list. They like to say, "Well, I'm on the list." Well, whether they were or not,
you actually were on the
list.
list.
I actually was on the list,
yeah.
as he would call me. So, and he knew what I could do. So I went in, but the funny thing is, when I went in, it was at the Theater Guild building, and they said, "Go to the 10th floor." Okay. So I go in and I get in the elevator. Well, there's no 10. There's just a button above 9 with no name or anything. So I just pushed that. And it opened up, and it was Cameron McIntosh International, their offices. Obviously, they don't want people to see that in the...
Yeah.
People up there. And so I walked in, and I go to the receptionist. I said, "Hi, my name is Paul." They go, "Oh, yes, Paul. You want to just sit over there?" And so I sat down, ready for the audition. Who's here? See what the competition's like. Who's coming in? Nobody came in. It was just me.
Wow.
And so I went. They said, Ron finally came in, saw me, and said, "Hey, come on, Paul, come on back." And so we went into a small room, probably the size of this room, windows looking out at Times Square. And in the room at the piano is Claude Michel Schoenberg, the man who wrote the music for Les Mis.
Wow.
So about right now, I'm keeping my cool, but inside I'm freaking out.
And he's accompanying you as you're about to sing.
Yes.
Yeah.
The man who wrote the music.
I'd be freaking out.
Yeah. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
Trying to hold you cool. So I sang. They wanted to hear me sing something comic. So I pulled out something funny and sang too. And then they asked me to step outside. I was the only person. I stepped outside. I don't know what they were chatting about for 5 minutes, and then they said, "Come on back in." I came back in, and they said, "Congratulations, you got a job."
Wow.
And that was it. And that was for the national tour.
Yeah.
So they said, "You got a job." And of course, we're giving hugs, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I got a job. This is so great. This is going to start my career." And then they said, "So you need to be in El Paso by Tuesday."
El Paso, Texas.
That's where they were at the time. Of course, they were going to pay for it, and said, now you got to go over to these offices, get sign your contract, get your tickets and everything.
I was stationed there for 3 years.
Yeah, there you go. And
wow,
that was that was where my Les Mis journey started, in El Paso, Texas.
Wow. So that's where the national tour started.
Tour was there. Yes.
Was in El Paso.
Yeah, that's where I had stopped. It was there for a week, and it was going to move on somewhere else, and that's where I met up with it.
Yeah.
And started to get trained into the show and all of that good stuff.
And then that tour lasted for how long?
Well, the tour I'd done on for years and years.
Okay.
The tour lasted probably 18 years, 20 years.
But you were on it for...
I was on it for 2 years. I did it.
Okay.
I did it for 2 years. I worked very, very hard. I knew that this was an opportunity for me to, move on. I didn't know what I was going to do after the tour. You never know what you're going to do in this business.
Right.
But I was making good money for the first time in my life. They pay you very, very well. And I was making real money. And, it was like, wow, this is great. I'm doing what I love. And hopefully I can continue this. And they very, very seldom ever took anybody from the tour, because my base was going to be New York, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, when I leave this, I'm going to go back to New York and live and try to get in shows. And, but they very, rarely took anybody from the tour and brought them to New York to be at the Broadway show. So it's like never happened. So I was kind of like, well, I don't know. So 2 years of that, it's great. It was an awesome experience. My wife was on the tour with me. We had a great time, and we weren't married at the time, but she was traveling with me. Went all over, did the show 8 times a week.
8 shows a week.
Yeah, and it was a
Wow.
huge hit everywhere you went. We did the show in Hawaii, we did it everywhere, and but after 2 years, I was pretty tired, and we were actually in Detroit of all places, and I was, I'm giving my notice. You have to give like 2 weeks or 3 weeks notice because they need time to be able to hire another person, bring them in, and train them in, right? Because you have to be put into the show. You don't just jump in the show. You have to learn the show. So I gave my notice, and I think it was the next day. We were at the theater in Detroit getting ready to perform, and they called me in the box office. They said, "Hey, Paul, can you come to the stage manager's office?" I'm like, "Oh God, what do they do now?" Busted. I walked in there, and it on the phone was Mary Beth Abel, who was the company manager, who was the production stage manager of the New York production, on Broadway.
Wow.
And I got on the phone with her, and I'm like, "Hey, Mary Beth, hi. Nice to talk to you. I don't know her." And she says, "Well, we have an opening in Grand Terre because Tom Seaman, who had played the role for years, is leaving, and you're our first choice."
Well, who played what role? Sorry.
Grand Terre.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. Character that I played all the time. To understudy then Javert and Thenardier.
Yeah.
Which I was doing on the tour too.
You already knew the show.
I knew the show, and they said, "And we want you to come to Broadway." And I'm like, "Well,
Wow.
I've just been doing the show for 2 years, I'll just quit." But I can't turn that down because I'm going to go back to New York anyway, and what better way to go back to New York than with a job in the biggest hit show in town? And so, what fool turns that down? Nobody. So there is always a measure of timing and luck in this business.
Sure.
That's not to say that had Tom not given his notice at the same time, it's not to say if he'd given it 2 months later, they wouldn't have called me also. But I think because I was active in the show at the time and everything, the timing just worked out well. And that's how I wound up on Broadway in the show.
You did the tour for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then went to New York and then did Les Mis on Broadway for how many years?
5 years.
Okay, so 7 years
7
straight
years total.
of Les Mis.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was pretty much all my 30s were Les Mis.
Okay,
pretty much. And so it was an incredible moment. It turns out though that I laid the groundwork for that though, because on the tour a lot of things happened with that show in the time that I was in it. And on the tour they had discovered that the Broadway show had discovered that they were running, it was the longest running time wise on Broadway. It ran 3 hours and 20 minutes. So anytime you go over 11 o'clock, you pay overtime to everybody except the actors. You pay overtime to the stagehands, to musicians.
Everybody except the actors.
Yes, the actors are on their salaries, so they get their weekly salary. The stagehands and them, they all get paid hourly.
Yeah.
So you're paying double time and overtime. Well, they discovered, the producer discovered that after however many years, like 9 years of that show, they'd paid like $16 million in overtime. So they're like, you know what? We need to make the show come down under 3 hours. So they went back to the drawing
Yeah.
boards with the creators and literally cut things out and did everything and reworked the thing and restaged it to come under 3 hours, so they didn't have to pay all that overtime.
Did it work out well when it was under 3
It
hours?
worked, yeah, it worked. Well, subsequently, they had to match the touring show to the Broadway show, so they came, and we were in Boston, and they came out, and during the daytime in Boston, we were there for like a month performing, they would be there, and this was the creators and Mary Beth, who was the production stage manager in New York. Also, they brought her in too, and they taught us the new show.
Okay.
So we rehearsed during the day, taught us the new show, and then we'd just do the old show at night, the show we were doing all the time. So it's kind of crazy, right?
That's pretty
And
crazy.
then every couple days they said, now tonight let's put this scene in, let's put that element in, okay, the shorter
Yeah.
scene. Until finally we were performing the show that came in under 3 hours.
Wow.
But that was the groundwork I laid, because what I discovered later was that they were in all the rehearsals and they saw my work in rehearsal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always work very hard. I'm very disciplined, and they saw that.
Do you-
And they commented on it at the time. I remember them commenting on that. I walked in the stage manager's office once, and Mary Beth was in there. She said something very positive about me. She's like, "Oh, we really love you," kind of thing. And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's really cool."
Yeah, that's nice to hear.
So that's why they decided to bring me to New York.
And do you think it starts with showing up early? Because you mentioned earlier that you're like, you have to be early. And I feel like I'm the same way, because if I'm either on time or late, my whole mind gets thrown off the remainder of the day. And I just can't
Yeah.
settle into it.
For me it is. I can't either. I mean, you're coming in a theater. You're coming into a fake environment. You're coming into an environment where you're going to have to inhabit this whole new world.
Yeah.
And it's just an empty stage. I've got to bring myself into the place.
Yeah.
I would get there an hour early, and I like to stretch and warm up and do everything, but just get myself acclimated to this space so that I can do this show. Some people don't. Some people can show up at the 7:30 call and do their show, and that's what they do.
That's cool.
God
Great
bless
for them.
God bless them. I've never done, and
Yeah.
I'm a person of routine, so I like my routines, and because I had that as an athlete, there was always a routine of a warm up that I always did, and I basically carried that into theater with myself, and I enjoy that. It makes me. Now, whether it makes me any better one night than another, I don't know. But I hopefully it makes me consistent.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it would make you consistent. And then, like you said, people do notice, I feel. I mean, whether they see you show up early or not, they at least notice, oh, well, there's something, he seems prepared, or he showed up early and stuff.
I think they do. I remember my crowning moment for me in my career was a moment I was on stage, and this was in New York, and I would always be on the stage warming up. Way before everybody else.
Yeah.
Stagehands are walking around doing stuff, and I'm on stage and I'm stretching and doing things, right?
People take notice.
Just what I do.
Yeah.
And there was a woman in the show named Betsy Joslin, and Betsy was an old Broadway broad. She had done Sweeney Todd, and she had done a whole bunch of shows, and she had a name, and she had done a lot of shows, and we loved Betsy and really respected her. She had run the boards for years and years, and I remember I was stretching on stage, and she was walking by on the stage to go over to another place, and she stopped midway, and she turned to me and she said, "Paul Truckey, you are the most disciplined actor I have ever seen."
Yeah.
And she just turned and walked away, and I was like, that's pretty cool.
Well, that felt good. Yeah.
It did. It was a moment. I was like, you know what, I don't do this for people to notice. This is what I do, but it's kind of nice that they do, and it doesn't hurt that somebody in the business thinks well of you.
Yeah.
Because that's how you get jobs.
Yeah. I mean, you're not doing it to hey, look at me, I'm early and stretching, but
no,
it's
I'm just doing it because it's what I do.
People will show up, and I feel like eventually, whether they see you come early or not, it's that preparation shows when.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it sets an example too. It can at times, and other people maybe start doing it too. And that wasn't my intention. It was just that's what I do.
You have other competitive people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just remember. This is kind of off topic, but it was one of Kobe Bryant's old teammates was telling a story. No, I'm sorry. He was playing against Kobe, and he had gotten there early, and Kobe was there, and Kobe was he was warming up, but he was shooting the ball as if he was playing in the game, but he was by himself, and he was pretending that he was ball faking, and then he was doing post up moves as if there were other people, but Kobe was by himself, and Kobe wouldn't leave, and then the guy who was on the other team eventually left, and then they played the Lakers that night, and then after the game he walked up to Kobe and he was like, "Hey, why did you go so hard in just the warm up?" And Kobe was like, oh, because I saw you walk in. And he was like, and I wanted you to know that no matter how hard you work, I'm going to work that much harder.
There you go.
He was like,
a little bit of a psych job. There you go.
I was like, that's just that Black Mamba mentality of like, well, I saw you walk in, and I just wanted you to know that I'm going to be working harder.
Yeah, what you're dealing with.
I just thought that was a cool story. I forget who his teammate was, but whoever he was, he lost to Kobe that night. And but anyway, yeah. So you do. So I remember when I first came here, well, you and I had a Zoom interview.
We did.
This was before I met Jimmy, because I had a Zoom interview with Jimmy shortly before I talked to you. And I did like these two monologues, one of which was like a Jack Sparrow monologue that was embarrassing.
I remember.
Yeah, and but then I remember after I was like, I don't know how I got accepted to Jimmy's program, but I'm happy I did, and I'm here now and like about to graduate, so I'm happy that happened. But I think my second class was the theater experience with you, and it was like the first or second day you were telling a story about how I think you were in New York, maybe you were on tour, but you were like doing your makeup and you looked in the mirror and you see the Clintons.
Yes.
And they were they in office then, or were they?
Yeah, we were in Washington, D.C.
Oh, that was in D.C.
Yeah, on tour.
Well, that makes sense because...
Yeah, and they came to the show. Yeah, and they were right behind me.
And you're just doing your makeup, and then you look in the mirror and you see Bill and Hillary.
Yeah, and they were standing right and coming in the doorway from the loading dock.
That's one of those things, and I feel like that's one of those things where no matter how you identify politically, it's like still a cool story to like.
Oh, it
that's
is.
Like, I saw the president in my dressing room.
Certainly, at the time of any 4 years, the most famous person on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
During their 4 years, good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah.
And they are intimidating. You're just in the presence of... Because they're almost as if they're not real. Could that be a real person? It's this thing, you know? And they are. And it's quite shocking. Picture it's me with Bill right there.
I don't know. I think the camera.
Yeah, it's right on there. Yeah.
And I did notice that before.
Yeah.
So that was that after the performance?
That was after. Yeah. They came on stage afterwards and said hi to us and everything. And we had spoken to them before too, but they came on, took pictures and everything.
That's on the stage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Wow.
and they did that. And Chelsea was there too. It was her 16th birthday, so she wanted to see the show.
Wow.
But another cool thing that happened is I was right by the loading dock. I had a break, and I went and looked out the loading dock, and you could see his limo was sitting in the loading dock.
Oh my gosh.
And I asked one of the Secret Service, "Can we take a look in there?" And they walked us over and opened it up, and we looked in. And
wow.
we were like, "Oh, that's really cool." And then about 2 weeks later, they actually gave us an invitation to the White House, all of us, and so we went as a cast, whoever wanted to go, and we went and we got to get a private tour, which was really cool.
Whoever wanted it. Why would you not want to go?
Yeah, and it was a private tour. We got to go to some places that the regular tour doesn't go. So it was really neat.
Wow, yeah. That I did not know.
Yeah, it was very exciting.
So that I don't know that I knew that part of the story. So that's amazing. So then what was the transition like from New York to back to the UP to now you're obviously
well, it's always about connections. Everything's about connections.
Yeah.
Right. So. Dr. Podolsky he was of course my greatest champion, and he would come out on tour and see me in the show. He came to New York all the time. Dr. P saw more Broadway shows than probably anybody in history. He would just go to New York, fly to New York from here on weekends and see every show.
Love Broadway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And so he would fly out at least a couple times a year, and he'd be, I'm in town, and we'd hang out, and he'd come see the show always, and always would celebrate me very much, as one of the graduates in the program. We made it to Broadway and all that, so it was always very exciting. And so when I was getting ready to leave the show there, because eventually, yes, I said I was ready to leave.
Sure,
the show.
Sure.
And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was, maybe going to audition for some other things, but I was also looking at other ideas. I had my master's degree, which is, you have to be able to teach at university. And he then called me up. Again, one of those moments of luck. He calls me up and says, hey, I'm taking a sabbatical. And we were looking for a person to replace me for 6 months here at university. And I know you're leaving the show. It'd be a great opportunity for you to come get your feet wet in academia and see what it's like.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, let's do it.
Sure.
So that's what got me back here.
Wow.
And I was here for that time. Then that was over, and then we left. We went back to Vegas for a while. And actually, I got an offer and taught at UNLV for a year because they, one of the people there, Jeff Cope, who really liked me. He was the dean there, and he hired me on to teach as a assistant professor, visiting assistant professor for a year.
And you said Vegas.
In Vegas, yeah. And so I was teaching acting classes and all of that, and I was getting my feet wet doing that. And I was getting ready to then sign on again because I had done it for a year, and I knew they were going to offer me another contract. I'm like, well, I'm here in town. Maybe I'll end up being here. Maybe I'll be teaching at UNLV. Great university, great place to teach. And we had the home there and everything, so it was a great place to live. And I was just getting ready, and just as I was getting ready to expect the call, a phone call comes at the house, and it's Robert Nolan, who is the company manager of Les Mis, the tour. And this is now in 2003.
Okay.
And this is like January 2003, I think, maybe end of January. And he goes, hey, there's an opening on the tour for your same character. And it's going to go for a while. It's out in, I can't remember where they were at the time. And he said, would you like to sign on? Just come on out on the tour for a while. I was like, wow. I was juggling things. I was going, well, it's a lot of money. It's good money. You make a lot of money on tour. And I could really use it. It'd be great. I know the gig. I could just step right in and go. I want to do 8 shows a week. But anyway, I could do it. But it was going to take a hiatus then, the tour. They said, we're going to go all the way till June, and it's going to take a hiatus for a summer, then it's going to start back up again. They would do that once in a while.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, yeah, I think I will. And then I hang up the phone, and then it's UNLV calls me up and says, hey, we got your contract here for another year to teach. And I'm like, oh. So I called Jeff and said, Jeff, I can make a lot more money out on tour than teach. I get it. Don't worry about it. Go ahead and do the tour. So I hopped back out on tour starting in Baton Rouge,
Louisiana.
Yeah. And then so I did that, and that lasted all the way until they closed in June. And so then
January to June.
Yeah. And then I was done. They shut down, and they said, well, we'd love you to come back. We're going to launch up again. And they had to offer people contracts to come back again, and said, well, certainly you're, one of the people we want to have come back on the tour. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I could again. It's good money, and I could do it.
But it's 8 shows a week.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't really want to do it, but if I need a job, I'll take it. It's a lot better than flipping burgers. And so I was expecting that, and then I get back to Vegas, and there's a phone call on the phone, and it's back here. It's Dr. P saying, hey, we've got the woman who was in actually the position I'm in now, because my position is Daddy Bear's position.
Right.
That turned into another woman who came in for a while. She had left, and she was leaving and going to another university. And he said, we're going to need a year replacement. And you can come on in. And they're going to search the job eventually.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what am I juggling? The tour? Don't want to do that. Jeff would probably take me back at UNLV, but this is a bird in hand. So we moved to Marquette.
Yeah.
And I was here for a year, and they searched for the job, national search. And I was in the pool, and they hired me, and I've been here ever since.
And you've been here, and this was, I suppose, 2004.
This was about 2003.
Okay.
It was in 2003 that I got hired full time.
Oh, okay. So 2003, and now 2025.
Yeah.
Now we're in. So
all those years, still here.
Yeah.
So
wow,
that's my story. Not that glamorous, but it's how things work out.
Well, some of it's glamorous. I mean,
some of it is.
Some of it's very glamorous.
I guess it is.
Yeah. And then, since you've been here, like I know that you've done. Well, I've only seen you perform in Rock of Ages, but then I've also seen pictures of you, like you did Sweeney Todd, and
since I've been here with the university, I've performed. I did The Scarlet Pimpernel. Was the first thing I did.
Okay.
Which is a really cool musical. It was a big hit. I did Beauty and the Beast.
That's right.
The first time we did it.
That's right.
I did Sweeney Todd. I did Les Mis. When Les Mis was released for 1 year, and we picked it up here right away and did it, and so I played Jean Valjean.
Had to snatch that up.
I did
to
the
do
lead.
it.
Yeah, and so I did that, and then I did Mamma Mia.
Yeah.
And then Rock of Ages was the last thing I did.
Yeah, I just remember coming to see Rock of Ages, and performers get insecure when they're in the audience. So when I go see shows, I feel like one of two things happen. I'm either really itching to be on stage as well, which did happen when I saw Rock of Ages, and then the other thing happens where it's like, I should just change my major because this is just like the amount of talent. I mean, you know, and like it's a humbling thing, but then it makes you want to work harder and step my game up. But I was like, oh my gosh, that's like, I mean, in your opinion, like, I guess talent wise, what we have here, I mean, like, and then what you have seen and experienced on Broadway, like, obviously Broadway, more money's put into it, but like talent wise, oh yeah, like a lot more money. But I mean, talent wise, would you say that? Am I a Broadway level performer? Is basically what I'm asking.
Sure.
Are we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like, just as far as like, obviously not experience, but like,
I think
what you know, here.
It's such a tough business. It's
Yeah.
a business that is unpredictable. I think one of the biggest ingredients is drive and determination and grit and lasting power.
Consistency.
Yeah,
keep at it.
That you got to keep at it. You got to keep at it. If you have a modicum of talent, and you have something to give, one thing is always nice. They're always looking for new people. I was looking for a new face, right? And so that's there. But yeah, it isn't like that's obviously there are some extremely talented people on Broadway. You know, there are some freaky talented people.
Yeah.
But those are only so many. The rest are people who are good. They're consistent. They work hard. They're good performers. But I worked with people on Broadway that I was like, I don't think they were the greatest. I've worked with better people before. I've also worked with some that I was like, wow, they're really freaking good, right? So yeah, I think anybody, if they've got a modicum of talent and a drive for this, they could absolutely do it. It just depends on what niche you have and what fits you. And a lot of that is that's like a luck of the draw for Broadway. Is, are you just right for something, and does it fit you right? And does that director see you in it? And then you could be great.
Would you say that? I mean, maybe even 90% of it is just, are you a decent person to be in the same room?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge part of it. That is certainly a huge part of begetting more work.
Yeah.
There's the old saying, anybody can get one show. You can get lucky and get one, right? But if you're not an appealing person and you're a jerk, you probably won't get another because word gets around real fast.
Yeah.
Because it's a small community. If you work hard and you're liked, and because you're with people all day long, 8 hours, 8 shows a week.
It's a very collaborative.
You're backstage talking most of the time when you're not even on stage. You want to get along with people, and that's what I found. I know that was the secret to my success. I was a good guy, and people liked me, and I had fun, and we had fun backstage, and we had a good time, and I got along with people. And so, so we'll hire him. He's great. Why not? Bring him back in. Sure, we'll hire you. We know what to expect. You're a good guy, and you're not going to be a problem. So that's a huge part of it.
Being reliable, being a nice person,
100%.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you got to deliver on stage.
Yes.
But, you can deliver on stage. You've done it. You know what to do. And if that thing just works for you and you get the right moment, there it is. Yeah.
So when I first came here, in this specific department, two main things like you and Jimmy and everybody really hammered was, so it's being able to be a person that people want to be in the same room. And then also, talent only gets you so far. It's the work ethic that really drives, and like being consistent. And then that's the secret to like longevity in career.
Absolutely. There are many, many talented people that are lazy, and they rely on their talent instead of working really hard. And you can outwork people all the time.
Yeah.
If you don't have any gifts at all, it's probably not going to be good for you. But if you have some gifts and you have some, like I said, some measure of talent, you can hone it and work hard on it and have drive, you can do it.
Wow. Well, that gives hope for a lot of people, I would think.
Sure it does.
Because, there's so many people who are talented, and then if it's just, it feels like it's simple, but it's not easy.
Well, it's a bit of a numbers game, too, right?
Yeah.
It's the more auditions you go to, the more, you're casting a wider net, and somebody might take a shine to you and say, yeah, you're the person for this role. I got you.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get it if you don't go in the room. You've got to, for a lot of people, it is a numbers game. They just go to 5 auditions a week, every single week, until finally they get something.
And no matter how they feel, you got to keep putting yourself out there, which is a challenge. But I think, for many people, it pays off in the end.
Sure, it does. And then for some people, it doesn't pay off. But but I think it can build a career. Whether you get a Broadway show is one thing, but Broadway's not the be all and end all of working in the theater. You can work in regional theater. You can work in there's a lot of work in the theater that doesn't involve Broadway. You can make a good living doing it.
Right.
But of course, that's the pinnacle, and everybody wants to get there, and it is great.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Well, yeah, this was helpful for me, and hopefully helpful to the other 10 people who were going to see this. So hopefully more than that. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time again. It was cool to hear more of your story.
Yeah.
I knew some parts of it, but then there were some things, like some parts to the stories where I was like, oh wow, I had no idea. That's amazing. So yeah.
There's probably some things that I forgot and left out, and life's a blur at times. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you again. This was fun.
Well, thank you, John. It's been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you, Paul.
You bet.